This video brings together three of the most extraordinary minds of our time: Chris Langan, Robert Edward Grant, and Federico Fagin. They deep dive into the very nature of God, what truly happens after we die, and why, at its core, reality is nothing but frequency. Through the revelations, they begin to dismantle everything we think we know, reverse engineering the code of existence itself. By the time you reach the end, even the simplest parts of life may feel unfamiliar, unsettling. Watch carefully. This may change how you see reality forever.
If I were at an intelligence agency and I heard there was a guy with the highest IQ ever recorded who was contradicting the liberal establishment agenda, I'd probably have a file on that guy. Have you had any run-ins with the...
Some interest has been shown.
Most of us have an IQ of 100, score in the 140 range, and you're in the genius to near genius category. 195 to 200, well, you're talking one in several billion people. Now, historians figure that Einstein and Franklin scored about 160, Darwin 165, Galileo 185, Isaac Newton 190.
That means Langan could possibly be the smartest person in the world.
So for those of us who have an IQ that's a little bit lower than yours, I'll admit it, with no false modesty and no undue confidence, the first question we have to establish: does God exist?
Yes. The reality has an identity, okay? The identity is that as which something exists, okay? Matter of fact, when you say the word reality, you're naming an identity. You're identifying something, this.
I'm smiling because your answer on this is so beautiful. It just reminds me of Moses at the burning bush. And Moses at the burning bush says, "Who shall I tell the people that you are?" Talking to God. And God says, "Tell them I am that I am."
That's right.
I am identity itself. I'm being himself.
That's exactly right. That's what the CTMU says. It just comes up with the mathematical structure that you need to build a reality out of that. You see? So you come up with that identity and then you search it for its properties. You see, once you've built the preliminary framework, then you start deducing the properties of this identity, and you find out that those properties match those of God as described in most of the world's major religions. The reality isn't just geometric, which is what Einstein thought it was, nor is it just linguistic. It's a blend of the two, right? Russell saw it as being linguistic. Einstein saw it as being geometric. Okay, so I decided that reality must be logico-geometric, putting the two of them together. And of course, then I realized, well, I've got to put together a theory, construct a theory, in which reality is actually logico-geometric. And so that's where the CTMU came from.
And the CTMU is the cognitive theoretic model of the universe.
Cognitive theoretic model of the universe.
This is your theory of everything.
My theory of everything, and it's all in the name. If you take a good close look at that, you've got cognitive theory, and of course you know a theory is a kind of language, theoretic language, okay? And then you've got cognitive theoretic model, you've got a model, and then you've got universe. You've got a language, you've got a universe, and then the model is the mapping between them. CTMU says those are all the same thing. All of those terms, all of those properties are distributed everywhere over reality. Reality can have only one structure once you realize that and you implement it in theoretical form.
But this is so important that you're not just talking about this siloed aspect of thought, or this, philosophy over here, language over here, math over here, physics over here, but you're presenting something that is universal.
Correct. Correct. Absolute and universal. To get the absolute invariance, the absolute truths of reality. Things that are true everywhere you go, no matter, at what time you exist or in what place you exist, it's the same. We reflect the structure of the universe. Each one of us, we're carried by it. Everything we do, we exist in a medium. What is that medium? Right? Where did it come from? Yeah. What holds it together? What is the unifying coherence, the source of coherence of that medium? What is the universe?
Damned if I know.
You ever hear of the simulation hypothesis?
Yes.
Okay, well, the simulation hypothesis is basically the idea that the reality we see around us, physical reality, is simulated on some sort of an automaton or a computer.
Yeah, some aliens somewhere have they've fooled us.
The idea is that you've got some kind of an automaton running, you've got a simulation running on it. And God, it's more panentheistic. You know what panentheism is?
I do. I think I do. But that means that we are in God. Let me know how I've gone wrong. We are in God, and God is in us. And it is not merely that God and the creation are one and the same, but they are quite related. Is that something approaching panentheism?
A little bit, yes.
Okay.
There's the idea is that you've got the physical universe that you see around you, but God is not confined to the physical universe.
Okay.
See, there's an ordinary pantheist assumes that God is somehow confined to the universe, that there is just what we see around us, and God is in every piece of it. God is distributed over it.
Yeah.
Right? But it's a little bit more complex than that, because this part of the universe that we see around us cannot exist just by itself.
Yeah.
Okay? There are certain things that it entails. And when you go into those entailments, that's how you get to God. That's how you get to the identity of reality. Okay? And now to get back to the reality of self-simulation, or at least that's what I call it, self-simulation. But to get back to the simulation hypothesis, that we're living in the display of that simulation. In addition to the display, there is also a processing aspect. Okay? And God, it captures both of those things. It captures both the display and the processor.
What do you mean? I hate to put it in the...
Well, I mean, okay, here's the display. You realize the display contains states.
Yep.
Okay, you see things, the objects contain it. States are static.
Yep.
That's why they're called states. Okay, static. How do they change? Well, they have to be processed. Something has to be processed.
Yeah.
And in the calculus, for example, those are tiny little infinitesimal intervals. Okay, but they are not actually contained in the states themselves. They have a neighborhood, a little tangent space or what have you, where you can sort of draw little vectors that suggest that some kind of processing is going on. But the idea of being a state and being a process, those are two different things.
Yeah.
In the ordinary way of looking at it, okay? It turns out that you can't properly describe reality and causation at all unless you put those things together somehow. And that's what it takes God to do, okay? God provides the processing functionality for your state. You have an internal state, an external state. You're a material human being, right? Like, to explain how that is changing through time, and maintaining its coherence through time, even as it changes, that's what you need God for.
Now, how do I make sense of consciousness?
Well, it turns out that in order to quantize that theory that I was talking about, that theory of identity, where you've got the display and you've got the processor, and it's handling both. It turns out that in order to handle both of those things, you need a certain kind of quantum. That quantum is called an identity operator. God is the identity. So obviously these little quanta, they have to be, they're doing things, they're processing, so we can call them operators, right? They are identity operators. Okay, the identity operator has, basically it takes input from the outside world, recognizes it or accepts it using syntax, processes it, and then returns it to the world as external state. Okay, so things come in, then they're processed, right? There's throughput, which is, you could call that the subjective or internal state of the identity operator, and then it's returned to the external universe. So what I'm saying is that's consciousness. And I'm saying that consciousness exists in every part of the universe, because those are the quanta.
That's what I'm asking. Are you telling me that this table is conscious?
In that sense, yes, generically conscious. But it's relying on our consciousness to do it. There's levels of quanta, okay? These are tertiary quanta. They're all put together using physical localistic forces, right? But those are underdeterminative. They don't fully determine what happens. Why? The Heisenberg uncertainty principle, for example, it tells you that, the quantum rules, they're probabilistic.
Right.
They don't actually determine events, okay? So what determines events? We do. We don't know how we do it, but we do it. When everybody's will is put together, we're all creating the best possible universe we can for ourselves. And God is what harmonizes all of our different perspectives and makes things happen for all of us at the same time. And if we were doing things correctly, this would be the best of all possible worlds. Sadly, however, we oftentimes make mistakes. And that's what we have to get out of doing, but we can't get out of doing it until we understand what reality is, what we are, and what the relationship between those two things is.
Do we really do much of anything at all in the sense, do we have free will?
Yes, we do. We have to have free will. Basically, what you've got is you've got a bunch of quantum fields in superposition, and then those fields consist of little fluctuations, little quantum fluctuations, right? Where is the fixed array? We were talking about a manifold, right, with a bunch of zero-dimensional points.
Yep.
Okay? Those two things are not compatible. Okay? Quantum field theory and that fixed array manifold where you can parameterize all of the causal functions using the manifold, that doesn't work. Okay? Those two things don't fit together.
Well, often the conversation, especially these days, becomes this sort of shallow discussion of, well, this caused this, and I'm going to describe a totally deterministic system, and so as a result of this causing this, causing this, causing this, you don't have free will. And you're saying cause is actually more complicated than just cause.
That's correct. In other words, talking about free will in those terms is osios. Means nothing.
Yeah.
You can't get anywhere with it. Okay? Reality is actually generative. Okay? It's not a fixed manifold. Everything is being created all the time. Not just our states. Our states are being recreated, right? You know, I can cross my legs, I can uncross my leg. That's the changing state.
Yeah.
But the medium around us is changing. When I look at you, I'm seeing Michael Knowles. Okay, I'm seeing you sitting there. But that means that I'm seeing your boundary. I'm seeing what distinguishes you from the external environment, right? There's a medium around you. So I have to be regenerating that at the same time as I'm regenerating your state in my head, okay? When I say regenerating, there's a reason I'm doing that. I could also say I'm recognizing Michael Knowles, I'm recognizing your state right now, but I'm also recognizing the state of the medium around you, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to distinguish you from the medium, and you wouldn't exist at all.
Right, right. Well, it's sort of like a little baby, right? Has trouble recognizing the limits of things and recognizing what some individual object might be from, you know, the glass on the table. They have trouble distinguishing those things.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Okay, the baby has to learn to distinguish those boundaries. And it has to receive the right visual cues at the right age so that it can actually learn how to do that.
Yeah. So now we're at metacausation. So what does metacausation
Causation works from past to future, okay? Metacausation works from past to future and from future to past in a closed loop. It's called a conspansive cycle. So that's basically what we have to do to quantization in order to make causality work. And of course, when I say causality, I mean metacausation, okay?
So how does...
Because ordinary past to future causality, parameterized by a fixed array, that doesn't work.
So I get past to future. This seems pretty simple. I pick up the glass of water, I put it over here, and now I remember 2 seconds ago that water was over here, and then I caused it to go over there.
Right.
So how do you cause something to go from the future to the past?
Can't go anywhere unless there's some place for it to go.
Yeah.
In the universe, everything changes with time. You're actually, you know, in the theory of relativity, for example, all the points are events.
Yep.
Okay, and that means that there's a time parameter involved. Okay, so when you take that glass and you move it from there to there, okay, you think that there's a point right there where you're going to move that glass. That's false. Okay, the point to which you are going to move that glass is actually in the future. When you pick up that glass, it's still in, you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, okay, that makes sense. Getting back to God, I guess we're always trying to get back to God. God is outside of time and space.
Well, God distributes over time and space, and there's some left over. Time and space is static. It's a display.
Yeah.
Imagine that you're a little homunculus inside a computer display, like the Matrix, for example, okay? God not only distributes over that, but there's a whole other domain where God exists. And that's the processing domain. That's the non-terminal domain in the CTMU. We're in the terminal domain, right? And most physicists, when they try to reason about the terminal domain, they reason under physical confinement. Okay, well, I can only look at physics, and I have to use what I know about physics, what I can observe about physics, to explain everything else that I explain. So they have that kind of explanatory closure going right there.
So the things that people see when they're on psychedelics, I usually write them off and I tell people, you know, you're just hallucinating. But you're saying maybe that's not all it is. They might be seeing something real.
Well, once again, what is reality? Is reality just stuff out there?
No.
Reality has a mental aspect,
Yep.
right? And once you admit that basically everything has a mental aspect, then of course what's going on in your mind is real. It takes on a kind of reality. It's not the same as physical reality. It is nevertheless real.
Are angels and demons real?
Yes. Yes.
I think so too. God is real, angels are real, demons are real. Is the devil real?
Oh, yes. Yes. Well, it has to be. You know, we were talking about Michael Knowles being surrounded by the medium and, you know, you've got a boundary. Well, God has a boundary too. He's got a very tight boundary. He is perfect. He can't take anything resembling imperfection, right? He can't take it into himself because that would be a contradiction. Okay, so God needs an antithesis in order to be properly defined. What is that antithesis? Anti-God, or Satan. So it definitely exists. Now, Satan isn't coherent because, you know, he basically hates existence. Nevertheless, he gains coherence through human beings, through secondary tellers, as they're called in the CTMU. In other words, Satan can nucleate power structures, for example, you know, things like corporations and governments, where you've got people in there that can be acquired as resources, and there's a kind of skeleton, you know, a corporate organization, a governmental, you know, organization that's holding them together, holding them in place, that can be exploited by Satan.
So you're not describing Manichaeism. You're not saying there's God and then the opposite of God and there's some maybe equivalence between the two. You're saying that God, obviously there is an antithesis. Christ has an antichrist, but that it's incoherent. Are you saying that he sort of that the devil sort of lacks substance, or that's why he needs the humans?
I'm saying the devil lacks coherence. Coherence is what brings everything into superposition, right, with itself. In other words, it allows something to, this is going to sound a little bit paradoxical, allows something to communicate non-locally with itself, right? All of its possible states are in superposition. They exist all at once.
Yep.